Mafia boss saved a blind woman, but her first words exposed a truth he hid for years. A ruthless crime boss dives into gunfire to save a blind woman who wandered into a hit meant for him. But the moment she hears his voice, she freezes and whispers the one thing that shakes him to his core. She says he's the man who killed her father. He tries to walk away, but someone else wants her dead. Someone who's been framing him for years, watching from the shadows. Now the most feared man in the city is forced to hide the one woman who fears him most, while she tries to remember the truth buried in her broken past. As killers close in and her memories sharpen, if she remembers everything, will she save him from the real traitor or destroy him forever? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The industrial district loomed quiet and dark as evening settled over the rain-slicked streets. Sodium lights cast sickly yellow pools across wet pavement, their glow reflecting off puddles like scattered gold coins. Lorenzo Vale emerged from the nondescript warehouse, his expensive Italian leather shoes silent despite their hard soles. 2 guards flanked him, their watchful presence more habit than necessity for a man who had survived a dozen assassination attempts. The meeting had gone as expected, another territory negotiation, another show of power. Lorenzo adjusted his suit cuff, covering the edge of a tattoo that marked him as head of the Vale family. The night air carried the tang of oil and wet concrete, familiar scents in this part of the city where legitimate businesses provided cover for less savory operations. Movement at the corner caught his eye. A woman stood hesitating at the intersection, her white cane tapping methodically against the curb. Even from this distance, Lorenzo could see she was beautiful. Dark hair falling past her shoulders, features delicate in the harsh streetlight. Her head tilted slightly, listening to the sparse traffic with an intensity that marked her as blind. Something about her struck him as familiar, though he couldn't place why. Before he could analyze the thought further, years of survival instinct screamed a warning. Lorenzo's hand was already moving toward his weapon when the first shots shattered the evening quiet. "Down!" he barked, but he was already moving. 3 steps brought him to the woman's side, just as bullets peppered the wall behind them. Without hesitation, Lorenzo wrapped an arm around her waist and hauled her behind a concrete support pillar, pressing her against the rough surface with his body as cover. She gasped, hands coming up instinctively to push against his chest. "What's happening?" "Stay still," he ordered, voice low and controlled despite the chaos erupting around them. His guards had taken defensive positions, returning fire at the attackers emerging from a dark van that had pulled up. Lorenzo kept one arm braced beside the woman's head, shielding her as he drew his weapon with his other hand. The weight of the gun was familiar, comfortable. He counted 6 attackers. Amateur work, given how they bunched together instead of spreading out. The woman trembled against him, her breathing quick but controlled. Professional training kicked in as Lorenzo evaluated angles and positions. He spotted the first attacker, trying to circle wide around their position. 3 shots in rapid succession, 2 center mass, 1 head. The body dropped. Lorenzo's movements were economical, practiced. This was what he did. This was what he was. "Carlos, left flank!" he called out to one of his guards. Gunfire answered as Carlos drove 2 more attackers back into cover. Lorenzo used the opportunity to take down another with mechanical precision. The remaining attackers realized their mistake too late. Lorenzo felt no satisfaction as he eliminated the final 2, just the familiar cold efficiency that had kept him alive and in power for so long. The echo of the last shot faded, leaving only the sound of rain and harsh breathing. "Clear the area," he ordered his men. "Find out who sent them." His attention returned to the woman still pressed against the pillar. Her face had gone pale, but she showed remarkable composure for someone caught in a firefight. Lorenzo lowered his weapon, but didn't holster it as he knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" "No, Her voice trailed off as he spoke. Something changed in her expression. Recognition, then horror. Her hand reached out, trembling fingers seeking the source of his voice. "I know you," she whispered. "That voice. You killed my father." The words hit Lorenzo with more impact than any bullet could have. He stared at her face, really seeing it now, and the pieces clicked into place. Evelyn Moretti, Don Matteo's daughter. The night everything went wrong. Memory flashed. Rain much like tonight. Screaming, gunfire. A younger version of this woman's face twisted in terror and pain. The beginning of his rise to power, and the first time he'd questioned everything he'd been raised to be. "Secure the perimeter," he snapped to his men, mind racing through implications. if she was here, now, after all these years. This wasn't coincidence. The attack wasn't random. Everything he'd built could unravel if the truth came out. Eve tried to push away from the pillar, but her legs buckled. Lorenzo caught her before she could fall, lifting her easily into his arms. She fought weakly, hands pushing against his chest. "Let me go," she demanded, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. "Not happening," Lorenzo replied, striding toward his waiting SUV. "You're coming with me until I figure out what's really going on here." She stiffened at his words, no doubt remembering the last time she'd been at his mercy. But Lorenzo wasn't the same man he'd been back then. The weight of her in his arms felt like penance, a reminder of past sins and debts still unpaid. The rain fell harder as Lorenzo carried Eve to the vehicle, her dark hair growing damp, clinging to pale skin. She'd stopped struggling, but he could feel the tension in her body, the way she held herself away from him as much as possible while in his grip. His guards opened the SUV's door, and Lorenzo settled Eve into the back seat with more gentleness than his men were used to seeing from him. She immediately pressed herself against the far door, face turned away, hands clenched in her lap. "Take the long route back," Lorenzo ordered his driver as he slid in beside Eve. "And somebody find out who's stupid enough to start a war in my territory." The engine purred to life, and the SUV pulled away from the scene. Lorenzo watched Eve from the corner of his eye, noting how she tracked the movement of the vehicle, how her head tilted slightly to catalog sounds. She was far from helpless, blind or not. In the close confines of the vehicle, he could see the fine tremors still running through her body, though she tried to hide them. The sophisticated clothes, the confident way she'd been navigating before the attack, she'd built a life for herself after that night. A life he was now disrupting again. "You're safe," he said finally, breaking the tense silence. Eve's laugh was bitter, cutting. "Safe? With the man who murdered my father? Don't insult my intelligence, Lorenzo Vale." The use of his full name surprised him. She'd done her research then, known exactly who he was. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. "If I wanted you dead, you would be," he pointed out, keeping his voice neutral. "Something bigger is happening here, and until I know what it is, you're under my protection." "Your protection," she repeated, voice dripping with disdain. But beneath the anger, Lorenzo caught a note of uncertainty. She was smart enough to know she needed answers as much as he did. The SUV wound through dark streets, taking a circuitous route back to Lorenzo's compound. Rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a rhythm that matched the pulse of tension in the vehicle. Eve's fingers worried at the handle of her cane, the only outward sign of her distress. Lorenzo studied her profile, searching for the girl he remembered in the woman beside him. The delicate features were the same, but hardened now by experience and loss. The blank eyes that had once been a warm brown were fixed unseeing on some middle distance. He had questions, dozens of them. Why was she in that particular location tonight? How much did she actually remember about her father's death? Who else knew she was back in the city? But he held them back, knowing pushing now would only make her retreat further. Instead, he reached for his phone, sending out rapid messages to his network. Within hours, he would know everything about Eve's movements since she returned to the city. For now, though, all he could do was watch and wait, knowing that the woman beside him held secrets that could either destroy everything he'd built or finally bring the truth to light. The SUV's tires crunched over wet gravel as they pulled up to what looked like an abandoned warehouse from the outside. Eve's head lolled against the leather seat, her consciousness fading in and out as the stress and adrenaline crash took their toll. She felt Lorenzo's arms lift her again, carrying her through what seemed like an endless maze of corridors, his footsteps echoing off concrete walls. The air changed suddenly, warmer, cleaner, with the sharp bite of antiseptic. When Lorenzo laid her on something soft, Eve's fingers brushed against crisp sheets. A hospital bed. The clinical smell grew stronger, mixing with the lingering scent of rain and gunpowder that clung to Lorenzo's clothes. "Dr. Martinez," Lorenzo's deep voice cut through Eve's haze. "Check her for shock and any injuries I might have missed." Gentle hands touched Eve's wrist, checking her pulse. A female voice spoke softly. "Her heart rate is elevated, but that's to be expected. Any pain, miss? Dizziness?" Eve tried to answer but found her tongue too heavy. The doctor's questions faded into background noise as voices argued nearby. Lorenzo's controlled tone carried an edge of steel as he spoke to what sounded like several men. "I don't care about protocol. She stays here until we know what's going on." "Boss, she's a liability," another voice started. "Did I ask for your opinion, Marco?" Lorenzo's words carried enough menace to silence the room. Postcards at every entrance. No one gets in or out without my direct approval. Eve drifted again, lost in a fog of exhaustion and fear. Fragments of conversation filtered through. Recognized your voice. Impossible. She was just a kid. Father's murder. Check the security footage. The next time Eve opened her eyes, warmth touched her face. Sunlight, she realized, streaming through what must be windows. The antiseptic smell remained, but the air felt different. Morning air, with its particular stillness. Where am I? Her voice came out raspy. Eve pushed herself up, hands exploring the unfamiliar bed. Her cane. Where was her cane? Looking for this? Lorenzo's voice came from her left. Something long and familiar touched her hand. Her cane. Eve snatched it away from him, gripping it like a weapon. Where am I? She demanded again, stronger this time. Somewhere safe. His chair creaked as he shifted. You wandered into the middle of a hit last night. Wrong place, wrong time. Eve's laugh held no humor. Liar! I know exactly who you are, Lorenzo Vale. I've known since the moment you spoke to me behind that pillar. Her hands shook, but she forced steel into her voice. Your voice! I've heard it in my nightmares for 15 years. The night my father died. The night I lost my sight. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Eve could feel Lorenzo's presence like a weight in the room, could sense the tension radiating from him. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. You're confused. Trauma can play tricks on memory. Don't you dare! Eve's fingers whitened around her cane. Don't you dare try to gaslight me. I might be blind, but I'm not stupid. I remember everything about that night, the gunshots, the screaming, and your voice giving the orders. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lorenzo's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. You don't know what you're talking about. Then deny it, Eve challenged. Look me in the face, these useless eyes, and tell me you weren't there. Lorenzo's footsteps moved away from the bed. You should rest. Dr. Martinez will check on you soon. Coward, Eve spat. His footsteps stopped. The silence stretched so long, Eve wondered if he'd somehow left without her hearing. Then his voice came, soft and dangerous. Careful, Miss Moretti. You're alive because I choose to keep you that way. Don't make me regret that decision. Before Eve could respond, a phone rang, a sharp electronic intrusion into their standoff. Lorenzo moved further away, his voice dropping to a murmur as he answered. Eve strained to hear, catching fragments. What do you mean specifically? Are you certain? No, keep digging. I want names. Fear crawled up Eve's spine as she realized the full magnitude of her situation. She was trapped in an unknown location, completely at the mercy of the man who had destroyed her life. Her fingers explored the bed, the side table, searching for anything familiar, anything that might help her get her bearings. The sheets were expensive, high thread count cotton. The air felt filtered, climate-controlled. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the steady hum of medical equipment. Lorenzo's footsteps returned, faster now, more purposeful. Eve turned her face toward the sound, wishing not for the first time that she could see his expression. That was my lieutenant, he said, voice clipped. The men who attacked us last night? They weren't from a rival family. They were hired guns, given one specific target. He paused, and Eve could feel his eyes on her. They were sent to kill the witness. Eve's breath caught in her throat. The word witness echoed in her mind, carrying with it fragments of memory, shouting, gunfire, the metallic smell of blood. And underneath it all, Lorenzo Vale's voice giving orders that changed her life forever. Her hands trembled as she gripped the bedsheets. The cotton twisted between her fingers as she processed this new information. She was a witness. But to what? The night of her father's murder was a jumble of sensory memories, nothing clear enough to testify about. Unless there was something she'd seen before losing her sight, something buried in her subconscious that made her dangerous enough to kill. I want to leave, she said, hating how her voice shook. Not possible. Lorenzo's tone left no room for argument. Someone wants you dead, Miss Moretti. Until I know who and why, you're staying right here where I can keep an eye on you. Keep an eye on me? Eve's laugh held a hysterical edge. That's rich, coming from the man who took my sight. Lorenzo made a sound. Frustration, perhaps, or something darker. Believe what you want about the past. Right now, my protection is the only thing keeping you alive. Your protection, Eve repeated bitterly. She turned her face toward where she thought the windows must be, feeling the warmth of sunlight on her skin. Somewhere out there was her normal life, her apartment, her job, her carefully constructed independence. All of it seemed suddenly very far away. The steady rhythm of rain continued outside, a reminder of the world beyond these walls. Eve listened to it, trying to center herself, trying to think past the fear and anger clouding her mind. She was trapped, yes, but she was also alive. And if someone wanted her dead because she was a witness, that meant there were answers to be found. Answers about that night, about her father's death, about why Lorenzo Vale's voice had haunted her dreams for 15 years. She heard Lorenzo move toward what must be the door, his footsteps measured and deliberate. Before he could leave, Eve spoke again, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "When you finally tell me the truth, and you will tell me, I want to know everything, not just about that night, but about why you're protecting me now. What are you afraid I'll remember?" Lorenzo's footsteps paused. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats and buried secrets. Then the door opened and closed, leaving Eve alone with nothing but the sound of rain and the weight of questions that threatened to suffocate her. Morning light filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor as Lorenzo Vale made his way down the corridor. The tray in his hands held a carefully prepared breakfast: fresh fruit, yogurt, toast, and water. Simple foods that wouldn't upset a stomach still knotted with stress and fear. He paused outside Eve's room, studying her through the security window. She sat perched on the edge of the bed, her dark hair falling in waves around her face, her unseeing eyes fixed on some middle distance. Even in hospital scrubs, there was a dignity to her posture that spoke of years spent refusing to be pitied. The door opened with a soft click. Eve's head turned toward the sound, her body tensing. "Breakfast," Lorenzo said, keeping his voice neutral as he set the tray on the bedside table. "You need to eat." "I need answers more than food." Eve's fingers found the edge of the tray, exploring its contents. "Tell me why you killed my father, and maybe then I'll consider eating." Lorenzo watched her map the layout of the breakfast items, noting how confidently she moved. "You seem very certain about what happened that night." "I know what I heard." Her jaw tightened. "Your voice giving the order? Then tell me." He settled into the chair beside her bed, maintaining enough distance to not crowd her. "Tell me exactly what you remember." Eve's hands stilled on the tray. For a moment she said nothing, and Lorenzo could see the internal debate playing across her features. Finally, she took a deep breath. "It was raining like last night." Her voice grew distant, lost in memory. "I was 15. Dad was working late at his accounting office. He called to say he was on his way home, but something felt wrong about his voice. I convinced Mom to drive me there." Lorenzo kept his expression carefully blank, though his pulse quickened. He remembered that night. The rain, the office building, the orders he'd been given, but the version he knew had never included a teenage girl. "We found the door unlocked," Eve continued. "Mom told me to wait in the hall, but I heard voices inside, arguing about numbers, about ledgers. Then," her breath caught. "Then the shooting started. So much noise, glass breaking, people shouting. I ran toward Dad's office, but someone grabbed me, pushed me into a storage closet." Her fingers twisted in the bedsheet. "That's when I heard your voice, cold, controlled, giving the order to finish it." There was more gunfire, and something exploded. The blast knocked me back. When I woke up in the hospital, everything was dark. Lorenzo's chest tightened. The explosion. That hadn't been part of the plan. None of it had gone according to plan. He studied Eve's face, seeing now the faint scarring near her temples that the doctors hadn't quite been able to erase. "You're very observant," he said finally, "even without sight." "I had to be." Her lips curved in a bitter smile. "When you lose one sense, the others compensate. I can tell by your breathing that my story affected you, even if you're trying to hide it." Lorenzo stood abruptly, needing distance from her perceptiveness. "Eat your breakfast, Miss Moretti. We can discuss the past another time." He left before she could respond, closing the door firmly behind him. In the hallway, he pressed a hand against the wall, allowing himself one moment of weakness as the memories surfaced. The night had gone so wrong, but the girl in the closet hadn't been part of any report he'd received. Someone had lied, and after 15 years, he needed to know why. Inside the room, Eve listened to Lorenzo's retreating footsteps. As soon as they faded, she began her work. She'd spent the morning counting steps, memorizing the sounds of different doors opening and closing, building a mental map of her prison. The guard changes were regular, every 4 hours. Their boots made distinct sounds on different flooring materials, helping her identify transitions between areas. The afternoon light had begun to fade when she heard what she'd been waiting for, the soft curse of a guard dealing with flickering hallway lights. The distraction was brief, but it was enough. Eve slipped from her bed, her bare feet silent on the cool floor. Her cane made no sound as she swept it in practiced arcs, navigating the corridor she'd mapped in her mind. 32 steps to the first turn. A water cooler burbled on the right. 20 more steps, then the floor changed from polished concrete to industrial carpet. The exit would be ahead. She'd heard the distinctive sound of its heavy seal whenever someone used it. Her fingers found the push bar, hope rising in her chest. One more step, and she'd be out, away from Lorenzo Vale and his secrets. A hand closed around her wrist. Eve gasped, but strong fingers held firm, not cruel but immovable. Lorenzo's cologne surrounded her, spice and leather and danger. Clever girl, he whispered, his breath brushing her ear. But not clever enough. Let me go. Eve tried to pull away, but his grip remained steady. I can't do that. His voice dropped lower, sending shivers down her spine. Because what you don't understand yet is that running won't save you. Those men last night, they weren't after me. Eve went still. What? They were after you. Lorenzo's words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Someone wants the witness eliminated, and they're willing to kill to make it happen. Eve's knees weakened as the implications sank in. She thought she was fleeing her father's killer, but instead, she might have been running straight into their hands. Lorenzo's grip on her wrist gentled, though he didn't let go. Come back to your room. We need to talk. Why should I trust you? Eve's voice shook despite her effort to stay strong. Because right now, Miss Moretti, I'm the only one who can keep you alive long enough to learn the truth. His other hand settled at the small of her back, guiding her away from the door. And I suspect we both want answers about that night. Eve allowed him to lead her back, her mind racing. She'd been so certain of Lorenzo's guilt. But now doubt crept in. If he'd wanted her dead, he'd had plenty of opportunities. Instead, he'd saved her life, brought her to a secure location, and was now protecting her from unknown threats. The question was, why? What had she witnessed that night that made her valuable enough to protect and dangerous enough to kill? And why did Lorenzo Vale, the man whose voice had haunted her nightmares for 15 years, seem suddenly like her only chance at survival? The door to her room closed behind them with a final sounding click. Outside, rain began to fall again, drumming against the high windows like nature itself was trying to warn her that everything she thought she knew about that night might be wrong. The rain drummed harder against the windows as Lorenzo guided Eve back through the corridors. His hand remained steady at her back, the warmth of it a stark contrast to the chill settling in her bones. The silence between them stretched, filled only by their footsteps and the distant sound of guards patrolling. Inside her room, Lorenzo pulled out a chair. Sit! His voice held no room for argument. Eve found the chair with her cane and lowered herself, gripping the armrests to hide her trembling hands. Tell me what's really going on. Instead of answering immediately, Lorenzo's footsteps crossed the room. She heard him retrieve something from a drawer, followed by the soft thud of an object being placed on the table before her. The attackers left this behind. Lorenzo's voice was controlled, clinical. A burner phone. There was a message on it. Eve's fingers tightened on the armrests. What did it say? Kill the witness. Make Vale bleed. Lorenzo's words hung in the air between them. Your presence in that alley wasn't a coincidence, Miss Moretti. Someone wanted you there when the bullets started flying. The realization hit Eve like a physical blow. She thought she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this was orchestrated. How? She managed. How could anyone know I'd be there? That's what my team has been working to discover. Lorenzo's chair creaked as he sat across from her. The phone was traced overnight. It led to a location we know well, a safe house, frequently used by syndicate traders. Eve's breath caught. Meaning? Meaning someone high up in the organization wants you dead and wants me to take the fall for it. His voice hardened. Someone who knows about your connection to that night 15 years ago. Eve stood abruptly, her cane clattering to the floor. I need to leave. I can disappear, change my name. Lorenzo's hand caught her arm, his grip firm but not painful. You won't survive an hour outside these walls. Whoever is behind this has resources, connections, they'll find you. You can't keep me prisoner here. The words came out more desperate than angry. This isn't about keeping you prisoner. Lorenzo's tone dropped lower, carrying an authority that made her shiver. This is about keeping you alive. There is no escape from this now. You're already in too deep. Eve sank back into her chair, the fight draining from her. Why do you even care if I live or die? There was a long pause before Lorenzo answered. Because something about that night doesn't add up, and you might be the key to understanding what really happened. The afternoon wore on, heavy with tension. Eve could hear Lorenzo moving around the room, making calls in hushed tones. Guards changed shifts outside her door. The rain continued its relentless drumming. As dusk approached, the atmosphere in the safe house shifted. Eve sensed it in the quickened footsteps in the hallway, the urgent whispers between guards. Something was wrong. Lorenzo's phone rang, and his sharp intake of breath told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. How many? A pause. When? Another pause. Understood. Lock down the perimeter. No one in or out without my direct approval. What is it, more? Eve asked, though she already knew it wasn't good news. More assassins have been dispatched. Lorenzo's footsteps approached her. We're moving at dawn. This location isn't secure enough. Moving where? Somewhere they won't think to look. He placed something soft in her hands. A blanket. Try to rest. Tomorrow will be challenging. Eve clutched the blanket, hearing Lorenzo move toward the door. Wait! She swallowed hard. Did you kill my father? Lorenzo paused in the doorway. The silence stretched for several heartbeats before he finally spoke. Get some sleep, Miss Moretti. Dawn comes early. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Eve alone with her thoughts. A cot had been set up in the corner earlier. She'd counted the steps to it multiple times during the day. Now she made her way there, wrapping herself in the blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and something distinctly masculine. Sleep refused to come. Eve lay awake, listening to the rain and the footsteps of guards, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. 15 years ago, she'd been so certain about what she'd heard, that voice giving the order that destroyed her world. But now she was trapped in a web of conspiracy and danger, tied to a man who might be her father's killer or might be her only chance at survival. The truth felt further away than ever, yet somehow she was closer to it than she'd been in 15 years. Whether Lorenzo Vale had killed her father or not didn't matter anymore. She was bound to him now, pulled into his dangerous world by forces beyond her control. There would be no going back to her quiet life, her routine, her independence. She was tethered to this man and his world now, for better or worse. Outside her room, she could hear Lorenzo giving orders, preparing for whatever tomorrow would bring. His voice carried that same authority that had both haunted and intrigued her, but now it represented something different. Not just the specter of her past, but possibly her only hope for a future. The rain finally began to ease, leaving behind a heavy silence. Eve pulled the blanket tighter around herself, breathing in its comforting scent. Dawn was hours away, but she knew sleep would elude her. Too much had changed. Too many questions remained unanswered. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, a warning of another storm approaching. Eve couldn't help but feel it was nature's way of telling her that this was just the beginning. The real storm was still coming, and she was caught in its eye with Lorenzo Vale as her only shelter. The night stretched on, marked by the steady tread of guards and the occasional murmur of voices in the hallway. Eve lay still, mapping every sound, every vibration, building a picture of the world around her in darkness. It was a skill she'd perfected since losing her sight, reading the world through its sounds and rhythms. But now those familiar patterns were disrupted by new elements. The subtle click of weapons being checked, the tense whispers of men preparing for conflict, and always, always, the commanding presence of Lorenzo Vale moving through it all like a shadow given form. Her fingers traced the edge of the blanket as she waited for dawn, knowing that when it came, everything would change again. She was well beyond the point of return now, caught up in a dance of danger and survival with a man who might be her greatest enemy or her only ally. A gentle knock stirred Eve from her fitful sleep. The door opened, and Lorenzo's steady footsteps entered the room. "It's time to move," he said, his voice low and controlled. "My men are ready." Eve sat up, her fingers finding the edge of the blanket. She hadn't changed clothes since the ambush, and her blouse still carried the scent of gunpowder and rain. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe." Lorenzo placed something on the bed beside her, fabric that felt like a sweater. "Put this on. It's cold outside." The sweater was soft cashmere, incongruously luxurious given the circumstances. Eve pulled it over her head, noting how it draped perfectly, as if chosen specifically for her. The thought was unsettling. 2 sets of footsteps entered. Guards, based on their heavy tread. Lorenzo's hand touched her elbow, guiding her up. "Stay close to me." They moved through the safe house, Eve counting steps and turns, memorizing the path. The morning air hit her face as they stepped outside, crisp and damp with lingering rain. Birds were just beginning their dawn chorus, their songs echoing off the surrounding buildings. Lorenzo helped her into what felt like a large vehicle, an SUV, based on the height and the sound of the door. The interior smelled of leather and something metallic that she recognized as bulletproof reinforcement. She'd learned to identify such details in the years since losing her sight, when every scent and texture became a crucial piece of information. The engine rumbled to life, a deep purr that vibrated through the seats. Lorenzo settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body and smell his cologne. Something expensive and understated, with notes of cedar and bergamot. As they pulled away from the safe house, Eve focused on building a mental map. First turn right, engine strain suggesting an incline. Second turn left, onto what felt like a main road based on the smooth surface. She counted seconds between turns, noted the subtle shifts in the vehicle's movement. Lorenzo's phone buzzed constantly. His responses were terse, professional. Maintain position. Check the southeast corridor. Double the patrols! Each call painted a picture of a vast operation, moving in precise coordination, all orchestrated by the man beside her. The city sounds gradually faded. Fewer horns, less traffic, the rhythm of the road changing. The air coming through the vents grew fresher, carrying hints of pine and wet earth. They were heading into the countryside. 2 hours, Lorenzo said, seemingly reading her unspoken question. Try to rest if you can. Eve leaned her head against the window, feeling the cool glass against her temple. The vibrations of the road transmitted through her skull, creating a map of texture and movement. The industrial district's concrete gave way to suburban asphalt, then to country roads with their distinctive rhythm. Trees, she could tell by the way sound changed, becoming more enclosed, the way sunlight flickered across her face in rapid patterns. The road began to wind, climbing and descending through what must be hills. The air grew notably cooler. Lorenzo's phone rang again. "Report," he commanded. A pause. "Good. Maintain the perimeter. We'll arrive within the hour." The journey continued in tense silence, broken only by the occasional updates from Lorenzo's men and the steady hum of the engine. Eve's other senses worked overtime, building a picture of their route, the banking of curves, the changing air pressure with elevation, the subtle variations in road surface. Finally, after what felt exactly like 2 hours, the SUV slowed and turned onto what felt like a private road. Gravel under the tires, the sound different now, more enclosed. They passed through what must have been gates. She heard them creak open, then close behind them with a heavy clang. The vehicle came to a stop. Multiple car doors opened and closed, other vehicles in their convoy, she realized. Footsteps on gravel, voices calling out greetings and status reports. Lorenzo's hand found her elbow again. "Welcome to the villa," he said, helping her out of the SUV. "Watch your step." The air here was different, cleaner, cooler, heavy with the scent of pine trees and wet stone. Birds called from multiple directions, their songs suggesting a large open space surrounded by forest. The gravel path beneath her feet was even and well-maintained. 10 steps to the main entrance, Lorenzo narrated as they walked. 3 shallow stairs, then through double doors into the foyer, marble floors throughout the main level. The ceilings are high, excellent acoustics for orientation. Eve's cane tapped against the marble, sending back clear echoes that helped her build a picture of the space. Large, open, with multiple corridors branching off. The air carried hints of lemon polish and fresh flowers. "Your room is on the 2nd floor," Lorenzo continued, guiding her toward what felt like a grand staircase. "Near my office for security, 22 stairs, with a handrail on your right." She counted each step, noting the precise distance between them. The upper floor had thick carpeting that muffled their footsteps but provided good tactile feedback for navigation. "This will be your room." Lorenzo opened a door, leading her inside. "Bedroom to your left, ensuite bathroom to your right. The windows face east. You'll feel the morning sun. All the furniture has rounded corners and the layout is open for easy navigation." Eve moved carefully through the space, her hands outstretched to map its dimensions. The bed was enormous, with what felt like silk sheets. A sitting area with plush chairs, thick curtains that would block out all light. Not that it mattered to her. Everything spoke of luxury rather than imprisonment, which somehow made it all more unsettling. "Dinner will be brought up later," Lorenzo said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "If you need anything, there's a phone by the bed. Press 1 to reach security." Eve turned toward his voice. "Am I a prisoner or a guest?" "You're alive," he answered simply, "which is more than you'd be anywhere else right now." The door closed with a soft click, followed by the unmistakable sound of a lock engaging. Eve stood motionless in the center of her luxurious cage, listening to Lorenzo's footsteps fade down the hallway. The room was silent except for the distant songs of birds and the whisper of wind through trees. She made her way to what felt like a window seat, running her hands over the padded cushion before sinking down onto it. The glass was cool against her fingertips. Bulletproof, undoubtedly. Everything in this place would be designed for security. Every comfort balanced against protection. The isolation settled over her like a physical weight. No street sounds, no familiar urban rhythms. None of the audio landmarks she used to navigate her daily life. Just silence, luxury, and the knowledge that somewhere in this fortress, Lorenzo Vale was orchestrating an operation to keep her alive while possibly hiding the truth about her father's death. The irony wasn't lost on her, seeking answers for 15 years, only to find herself dependent on the very man who might have destroyed her world. But as she sat in her gilded cage, listening to the unfamiliar forest sounds, Eve couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was far more complicated than she had imagined. The sun's warmth shifted on her face as the day progressed, and Eve remained by the window, building a mental map of her new prison. Every sound, every vibration, every subtle change in air current became another piece of data to process. She might be confined, but she refused to be helpless. Somewhere below, she could hear the steady rhythm of guards patrolling, the occasional murmur of voices carrying through the halls. This place was more than just a villa. It was a fortress, and she was now at its heart, protected or imprisoned by a man whose voice still haunted her dreams. The grandfather clock somewhere in the villa struck 2, its deep resonance carrying through the walls. Eve sat cross-legged on the window seat, head tilted as she catalogued the symphony of sounds drifting up from below. The kitchen was particularly active, pots clanking, water running, the rhythmic chop of knives against cutting boards. Voices carried through the ventilation system, most speaking Italian in clipped professional tones. Her fingers traced patterns on the cool glass while she mentally mapped the villa's activity. Guards patrolled in precise intervals, 12 steps, pause, turn, repeat. Somewhere below her window, gravel crunched under boots every 7 minutes. The security was like clockwork, which meant any deviation would be immediately noticeable. The lock turned with a soft click, and Eve straightened, recognizing Lorenzo's distinctive footsteps. Measured, deliberate, with a slight emphasis on the right foot that suggested an old injury. "Your dinner," he said, the door closing behind him. A cart wheeled forward, bringing aromas of garlic, herbs, and roasted meat. "I'll be overseeing your meals personally. The regular staff won't have direct access to you." "Afraid I'll what? Corrupt your servants?" Eve's tone was sharp, but her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. "I'm afraid someone will slip something into your food." The cart stopped beside her. "The threat isn't just external. We have to consider internal betrayal." Eve turned toward his voice. "So you'll be my food taster?" Among other things, a chair scraped across the floor as he sat. "The plate is at your 2 o'clock, wine at 11, silverware wrapped in your napkin at 4. She reached out carefully, finding each item exactly where he described. The fork felt heavy, expensive. Quite an upgrade from prison food. "This isn't a prison." Lorenzo's voice held a note of something. Frustration? "It's protection. Protected by the man who—" She stopped herself, fingers tightening on the fork. "Who what?" His tone cooled several degrees. "Say it." Eve set the fork down with deliberate care. "The man whose voice I heard the night my father died, the night I lost my sight." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant kitchen sounds and the steady tick of a clock on the wall. Finally, Lorenzo spoke, his words measured. "You're certain it was my voice?" "I'll never forget it." She turned her face toward him. That cold tone giving the order, the gunshots that followed. Another long pause. Then, "Eat your dinner. We have things to discuss." Eve took a small bite, surprised by the quality despite herself. The meat was perfectly seasoned, tender enough to cut with just her fork. They ate in tense silence for several minutes before Lorenzo spoke again. "You need to learn the layout of this wing. I won't have you helpless if something happens." "Planning on more attempts on your life?" "On yours." His chair scraped back. "Come here." Eve hesitated, then stood, using her cane to navigate around the cart. Lorenzo's hand touched her elbow, steadying her. "The wall to your right," he said, guiding her hand to the smooth surface. "Count the door frames. 3 to my office, 5 to the stairs, 2 to the security station. Remember the rhythm of the floorboards. They creak differently at each intersection." They walked the hallway slowly, Lorenzo naming distances and landmarks. Eve's fingers traced crown molding, door frames, the subtle texture changes in the wallpaper, each detail added to her mental map. "The security station always has 2 guards minimum," he continued. "They'll respond to any disturbance, but they won't enter your room without my direct order." "So I'm surrounded by your men, but they can't help me." Eve's lip curled. "Convenient. They can't help you because I don't know which ones I can trust." Lorenzo's grip tightened slightly on her elbow. "Someone hired those hitmen. Someone with inside knowledge." Before Eve could respond, the lights hummed and died. Her breath caught as darkness swept through the villa. Not that it made a difference to her sight, but the sudden change in ambient sound was disorienting. Alarm systems whirred to life, their low drone vibrating through the walls. Eve's heart hammered, her free hand clutched at Lorenzo's sleeve, an instinctive grab for stability that she immediately regretted but couldn't make herself release. "Steady," Lorenzo murmured, his other hand coming to rest at her waist. "The backup generators will kick in. Count it out. 1, 2. On 3, emergency lights hummed to life. Eve could hear guards moving below, radio static crackling with status reports. "Just a power fluctuation, sport," Lorenzo said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The storm last night probably damaged a line. Systems are checking now." Eve realized she was still gripping his sleeve and forced herself to let go. "I'm fine. I don't need your comfort." "No?" His hand remained at her waist, warm and steady. "Your pulse says otherwise." "That's fear, not trust." But she didn't step away. "Fear I can work with." Lorenzo's thumb traced a small circle against her side, probably unconsciously. "It means you're smart enough to recognize the danger. Now you just need to be smart enough to accept the protection." Eve turned her face away, hating how his touch steadied her, how his presence made her feel grounded, despite everything he represented. "I haven't accepted anything. Haven't you?" His voice held a note of dark amusement. "You're here, aren't you? Eating my food, learning my halls, letting me guide you?" "I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice." Lorenzo stepped back, his hands falling away. "You could try to run, fight, refuse to cooperate. Instead, you're adapting, surviving." Eve wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold without his proximity. "Is that what you admire? Survival?" "I admire strength," he said simply. "Even when it's turned against me." The main power hummed back to life, systems rebooting one by one. Eve heard guards confirming the all clear, the regular rhythm of the villa resuming. "You should rest," Lorenzo said, guiding her back toward her room. "Tomorrow we'll continue mapping the villa. You need to know every exit, every safe room, every possible escape route." "So, I can't use them?" "So you can use them correctly." They reached her door. "Survival isn't just about running. Sometimes it's about knowing when to stay put." Eve stepped inside, turning to face him. "And when will I know the difference?" "When you start trusting your instincts instead of your assumptions." Lorenzo's voice lingered in the doorway. "Good night, Eve." The door closed, lock engaging with familiar finality. Eve made her way to the bed, lying down fully clothed on top of the covers. The villa settled around her, guards changing shifts, kitchen staff cleaning up, security systems running their evening checks. She pressed her fingers to her waist where Lorenzo's hand had rested, remembering the steady pressure, the grounding force of his presence. Everything in her screamed that she shouldn't feel safe with him, shouldn't let his touch calm her, shouldn't be adapting to this gilded cage he'd built around her. But as she lay in the growing quiet, Eve couldn't deny the truth. Something in her responded to him, trusted him, even as her mind rebelled against the possibility. The man whose voice haunted her nightmares now anchored her in moments of panic. The hands she believed had orchestrated her father's death now guided her with careful precision through this new reality. Sleep refused to come as Eve wrestled with the contradictions. Outside, the night deepened, and somewhere in this fortress of his making, Lorenzo Vale moved through his own darkness, carrying secrets that could either damn or save them both. Sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains as Eve sat up in bed, awakened by footsteps approaching her room. The door opened with a soft click, and she recognized Lorenzo's measured stride, accompanied by the scent of fresh coffee and warm bread. "Breakfast," he announced, setting what sounded like a tray on the bedside table. "We need to discuss the situation." Eve reached out, fingers finding the edge of a porcelain cup. "What situation?" "Our intelligence suggests multiple groups are mobilizing, not just the original attackers." Lorenzo's voice held careful control. "Someone leaked your location to several interested parties. They're all converging here." Eve wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting it steady her. "Why? What do they think I know?" "That's what concerns me." Chair legs scraped against the floor as Lorenzo sat. "You recognize my voice from years ago, but there's more to this. Someone believes you're valuable enough to risk attacking my territory." Eve took a slow sip of coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "And you still won't tell me if you were there that night?" "Not yet." Lorenzo shifted, fabric rustling. "Eat something. Then I'll show you the courtyard. You need fresh air, and I need you familiar with the exterior layout." An hour later, Eve stood in the villa's courtyard, feeling morning sunlight warm on her face. The space felt vast around her. Echoing footsteps suggested high walls, and the air carried hints of roses and herb gardens. Armed guards positioned themselves at regular intervals. She could track their movements by their boots on stone paths. Lorenzo stayed close, describing the layout. Stone pillars every 20 feet along the perimeter. 3 exits, north, east, and through the kitchen. Fountain in the center, raised gardens to your right. Eve traced her fingers along a sun-warmed pillar, building the space in her mind. Nearby, she heard Lorenzo's phone buzz, followed by his quiet conversation with what sounded like his security team. "Third attempt at infiltration through the east fence," a man reported. "Different tactics this time, professional equipment." "Increase patrols," Lorenzo ordered. "They're testing our response times. Change the rotation patterns." Eve pretended not to listen, but her mind raced. Professional equipment meant serious players. The danger was escalating, and she still didn't understand why. The morning passed tensely. Eve sat on a stone bench, soaking in the warmth while trying to ignore the constant movement of guards around her. Lorenzo paced nearby, issuing orders in low tones that carried hints of strain. Just before noon, everything shattered. The alarms screamed to life, harsh, piercing wails that made Eve jump to her feet. Shouts erupted from multiple directions, followed by the distinctive pop of gunfire. "Eve!" Lorenzo's hand closed around hers, yanking her behind one of the stone pillars she'd traced earlier. His body pressed against her back, shielding her as bullets sparked off stone. The next moments burned into her memory through sound and sensation. Lorenzo's controlled breathing, the brutal efficiency in his movements as he returned fire, the way he kept one hand pressed to her shoulder, keeping her secure behind him. "Down!" he barked, and Eve dropped instinctively as something whizzed overhead. 3 shots from Lorenzo's gun, 3 thuds of bodies hitting stone. More gunfire from the guards, shouts of "Clear!" echoing across the courtyard. When silence finally fell, Lorenzo's hand trembled slightly against her shoulder. "Are you hurt?" Eve shook her head, her throat too tight for words. Her fingers found his sleeve, gripping the familiar fabric. "Inside. Now." Lorenzo's arm wrapped around her waist, guiding her quickly through the courtyard. She counted his heartbeat through the contact, rapid but steady, a warrior's pulse. They reached her room, and Eve sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly weak. Lorenzo paced the small space, his footsteps carrying barely contained violence. "I won't let anything touch you." His voice cracked slightly, the first real break in his control she'd heard. "Whatever they want, whatever they think you know, they'll have to go through me." Eve lifted her face toward his voice, catching the scent of gunpowder and something distinctly him. "How many?" 8. His pacing stopped. "Professional hit squad, well-funded. They knew our patrol patterns." "You killed them all?" "Yes." No apology in his tone, no hesitation. Eve wrapped her arms around herself, processing the violence she'd witnessed through sound and touch. This man, who guided her so carefully through his halls, who brought her breakfast and showed her gardens, had just eliminated 8 people with mechanical precision. "Why?" she whispered. "Why protect me like this when you—" She couldn't finish the accusation. Lorenzo's silence filled the room, heavy with unspoken things. She heard him step closer, then stop, as if hitting an invisible barrier. "Rest," he said finally, his voice rough. "I need to deal with the aftermath. Guards will be outside your door." Eve sat frozen on the bed's edge as his footsteps retreated. The door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo in her chest. Outside, she could hear the organized chaos of cleanup, bodies being removed, evidence disappearing under efficient hands. She pressed her palms against the soft bedding, anchoring herself in the present moment. The man who might have destroyed her life had just saved it. Again. The voice that haunted her nightmares now promised protection with fierce dedication. The hands she imagined covered in her father's blood had sheltered her from bullets without hesitation. The contradiction twisted in her chest. How could she fear and trust the same person? How could she hate and depend on him in equal measure? Outside her door, Lorenzo spoke quietly to his men, issuing orders for increased security. His voice carried that edge of strain, that crack in his usual control that revealed something deeper than simple protection of an asset. She heard him pause, his hand probably resting on her door, before his footsteps moved away. Eve lay back on the bed, her mind replaying the morning's violence. Lorenzo's body shielding hers, his unwavering focus on her safety, the tremor in his hand that betrayed how deeply her protection affected him. Whatever secrets he carried about her father's death, whatever guilt or justification lay behind his actions that night years ago, one thing was becoming devastatingly clear. Lorenzo Vale would kill or die to keep her safe, and she had no idea how to reconcile that with her hatred of him. The afternoon sun crept across her room as Eve lay still, listening to the villa's rhythm return to normal. Somewhere beyond her door, Lorenzo Vale carried the weight of his secrets and the burden of her protection, equally unable to step away from either. The villa settled into an uneasy quiet as evening descended. Lorenzo found Eve in her room, still processing the day's violence. "Come with me," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "We need to talk." Eve followed his footsteps down the hallway, counting the turns until they reached what he described as the sitting room. Heat from a crackling fire reached her face, and she heard the soft creak of leather as Lorenzo guided her to a chair. "Tell me what you remember," he said after a long moment. "About that night. All of it." Eve's hands tightened in her lap. The fire's warmth couldn't chase away the chill of those memories. "Why now?" "Because something doesn't add up. The attacks, the timing, it's connected to that night." She took a deep breath, forcing herself back to those fragments of memory. There was another voice, not yours, whispering commands, her brow furrowed with concentration. Footsteps on hardwood, multiple sets, and cologne, strong, spicy, nothing like what you're wearing now. Lorenzo shifted in his seat. "What else?" "The voice I thought was yours. It came from across the room, but the cologne was right next to me when—" She stopped, her hands trembling. "When the shot came," Lorenzo finished quietly. "Yes." Eve's voice cracked. "I always blamed you because of that voice. I was so sure." "I was there that night," Lorenzo admitted. His words carried the weight of long-buried truth. "But not how you think. I had given an order to watch your father, protect him. Someone twisted that command." The fire popped and hissed in the silence between them. Eve turned her face toward his voice. "Tell me everything." "I took control of the Vale family through blood," he said, his tone harsh with memory. "A coup that left bodies in every corner of the city. Your father, he was different, clean, respected. I wanted him as an ally, not an enemy. But someone wanted him dead. Yes, and they used my voice, my authority, to do it." Leather creaked as Lorenzo leaned forward. "I've spent years hunting for the truth. That night haunts me, Eve. Not just your father's death, but what happened to you." Eve's breath caught. In all her years of hatred, she'd never considered Lorenzo might carry his own guilt, his own need for answers. "The attacks now," she said slowly, "they're from whoever really gave that order. They're scared we'll piece it together. That cologne you mentioned, I know who wears it. A man who whispers commands and lets others take the blame." The fire crackled lower, casting shifting shadows Eve could sense, but not see. She found herself leaning closer to Lorenzo's voice, drawn to the raw honesty she heard there. "I never wanted this life," he confessed quietly. "The violence, the power, it was survival. But that night changed everything, made me question every order, every loyalty." Eve reached out instinctively, her fingers finding his sleeve. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you deserve the truth. And because—" He paused, his breath catching slightly. "Because I need you to understand that protecting you isn't just duty. It's redemption." The fire had burned to embers when Lorenzo finally stood. "It's late. You should rest." Eve rose, accepting his guidance toward the door. Their steps synchronized naturally now, her trust in his lead growing despite everything. At her room, his hand brushed hers, a touch so brief she might have imagined it, yet it sent warmth spreading through her chest. Neither spoke of that moment as he opened her door. Eve stepped inside, her mind spinning with new perspectives on old wounds. Lorenzo's presence lingered in the doorway, as if he too felt the shift between them, the way shared truths had begun to bridge the chasm of their past. The door closed softly, leaving Eve alone with the revelation that the man she'd blamed for destroying her life might be the only one who could help her rebuild it. Outside, Lorenzo's footsteps faded down the hall, carrying away unspoken words and unacknowledged touches that would echo through both their dreams. The morning sun warmed the villa's marble floors as Eve traced her fingers along the wall, counting doorways with newfound certainty. Her cane tapped rhythmically, echoing through the corridor. Lorenzo watched from the end of the hall, noting how she moved with growing confidence. "Your hearing," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "It could be your greatest defense." Eve paused. "What do you mean?" "Let me show you." Lorenzo stepped behind her, his chest barely touching her back. "Listen for the subtle sounds others miss, fabric rustling, breathing patterns, weapon slides." His hand settled on her shoulders, adjusting her posture. His breath stirred her hair as he spoke near her ear, explaining how different threats created distinct sounds. Eve's pulse quickened at his proximity. When she turned to ask a question, their faces were inches apart. The air grew thick with tension. Lorenzo's breath hitched as they gravitated closer, lips almost touching. Eve jerked back with a gasp. A memory crystallized. "Make Vale take the fall," the second voice had whispered that night. I need space," she stammered, stepping away. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Guard," he called sharply. "Escort her to her room." Alone in her bedroom, Eve gripped her sheets, fragments of memory spinning wildly. In his study, Lorenzo poured whiskey with shaking hands, cursing his momentary weakness. For 2 days, tension filled the villa like a gathering storm. Eve and Lorenzo passed each other in silence, their almost kiss haunting every interaction. During breakfast, staff delivered her meals without Lorenzo's usual commentary. During dinner, his footsteps would pause outside her door before continuing down the hall. On the third evening, the villa's routine cracked. Lorenzo's security team reported disturbing findings during their patrol. Surveillance cameras showed signs of tampering, and a service entrance stood slightly open. Someone inside was betraying them. Eve noticed changes too. Her regular guard barely spoke, his usual chatter replaced by tense silence. Throughout the villa, hurried footsteps and urgent whispers created an atmosphere of unease that made her skin prickle. Lorenzo burst through her door, his breath heavy. "Eve! There's a traitor!" The warning came too late. A presence materialized behind her, silent, deadly. Before Eve could react, something hard struck her head. The world tilted sideways as consciousness slipped away. "Eve!" Lorenzo's shout echoed through the hallway, followed by the sound of his gun being drawn. Through fading awareness, Eve felt herself being dragged across the floor, her limp body pulled through the compromised corridor by the masked intruder. The villa erupted into chaos as Lorenzo charged down the hallway, his gun drawn. Multiple attackers emerged from the shadows, forcing him into a deadly firefight. Bullets shredded expensive wallpaper and shattered priceless vases as Lorenzo methodically eliminated threats. But precious seconds ticked away while Eve disappeared deeper into the night. Eve's consciousness returned slowly, her head throbbing. Cold air hit her face despite the blindfold, and rough ropes bit into her wrists. The vehicle swayed and turned, but something else caught her attention, a scent that made her blood run cold. That cologne. The same one from the night her father died. The car stopped. Rough hands dragged her across concrete into what felt like a warehouse. Footsteps echoed off high walls as someone approached. "Hello, little bird," a cultured voice said. "Remember me?" Eve's breath caught. The voice continued, stepping closer. "I am Dante Vale, Lorenzo's dead brother, though reports of my death were premature." He laughed softly. "I arranged your father's murder. Had Lorenzo take the blame. Those villa attacks, all me." Outside, Lorenzo arrived at the warehouse, chest heaving from his pursuit. Raw fury radiated from him as he prepared to breach the building. Lorenzo burst through the warehouse doors like an avenging demon, his movements precise and lethal. Gunshots echoed off metal walls as he eliminated Dante's guards one by one, each shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy. His eyes blazed with a fury Eve had never heard in his footsteps before. Eve sat bound to a chair, her other senses heightened as she tracked the sounds around her. Dante's expensive shoes clicked against concrete as he moved behind her, using her as a human shield. His cologne filled her nostrils, triggering flashes of that terrible night years ago. "Lorenzo, 3 steps to your right!" Eve shouted, pinpointing Dante's position by sound. Her call gave Lorenzo the advantage he needed. The brothers clashed violently. Glass shattered, metal scraped, and bodies slammed against walls. Eve heard the wet sound of fists meeting flesh, the grunt of pain that wasn't Lorenzo's. Then came the final, devastating shot that ended Dante's reign of terror forever. Lorenzo rushed to her side, knife slicing through her restraints. His hands trembled as he pulled her into his arms. "I've got you," he whispered hoarsely. "You're mine. I'll spend the rest of my life earning this." Hours later, after Lorenzo's loyal authorities had cleaned the scene, he carried her to safety. In the weeks that followed, Eve began treatment to restore partial vision while living at the villa, no longer as a prisoner but as Lorenzo's partner. Standing in their bedroom, Eve traced Lorenzo's features with gentle fingers, memorizing him anew. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Even if you never see me clearly, you're the one person who always truly saw me." She smiled softly. "And you're mine, Lorenzo? Sight or no sight." Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.